Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. It's Steve Holzer, BIM Object. We're getting ready to remotely today, not the normal Burbank headquarters of BIM Object, North America, but where I'm usually speaking to you from. But I'm in Seattle, Washington. Yesterday, I was a judge at at the first ever Digital Built Environment Institute's hackathon. They had a pre-show hackathon. I'm up here in Seattle for the Built and Building Content Summit, or BCS programs. The rest of the week, we'll be setting up our fair stand today and be here all week sharing with folks the power of BIM Object. And the Built show is largely, we'll say, modelers, content developers, that sort of audience that is very interested in our BIM script technology. So I'll be sharing a lot of that as well, and getting a lot of guys signed up, gals signed up for the BIM script online accreditation process, so which is freely available. Today we're going to be talking about why all these file formats. Got a couple of good cases for you, a number of things that are converging together to in the tech space of the built environment to really demand more than just a basic model format. So we'll be talking about that. As we're getting ready to start off, I'll give everybody a few minutes to get settled in here. If you could, as we say, move to the front, We got a full packed house and crowd here today. Actually, this is the first time we're potentially going to run out of space, so hopefully we'll be able to fit everybody in. The good news is that if anyone of you or any of your colleagues that had signed up for the webinar are not able to attend for whatever reason, meeting came up, I know life happens, and know that anyone will get a copy of, or excuse me, a link to a copy of the video within a couple of days of the webinar. Why so many file formats? And by the way, this came, there were a number of questions 2 weeks ago on our inaugural kickoff of this webinar series, where we did somewhat of an overview. So where's this digital content used? The digital content is the currency of the built environment. Where all is it used throughout that full building life cycle? We had a lot of questions, around the concept of why all these file types? Well, why are they needed? Why are they necessary? What does it matter? Especially a lot of manufacturers were, I think, intrigued that their digital representations of their products are used throughout that full building life cycle, especially later on in the process. So throughout the day, I'm going to keep my eye on the questions panel. Put them in there. Anything that comes up, let us know right away. In some cases, we'll stop and explore. If you have something that's relative to where I'm at in the discussion. If not, I'll be responding with any of them after the webinar. You'll get an answer directed to you individually, even. Any questions we don't have time for? Yes, I'll get those afterwards. We got a pretty busy agenda here. This was a really challenging program for me to get consolidated and condensed back down, because there's just so much, and I really there's so much we could dive into. There's so much going on in the industry today that's seeing, even yesterday we here at the Digital Built Environment Hackathon, with some of the programming that we see going on now. I had a chance to talk with Anthony Houck, who has set up as part of HiPAR, and they're doing some great things. There's a lot of amazing developments happening. Anyway, as I said, this is being recorded and it's available to everybody to review and share after the fact. So I'm going to throw a little poll up here just to see who is doing what. What are you guys all working on? What are you all involved in? That will give me a good idea of our audience and what their roles are. So hopefully I can kind of pattern the actual progress of my questions and so forth to the audience as you are. So yeah, look at that. Nice. You guys are You're right on the buttons today. That's fantastic. Over half of you already voted in. I'll share it in just a minute. Um, Looking like we're having a little bit of a shift. This is good. Uh, we're seeing more building product manufacturers come in here. That's fantastic. And another one that I see, for so long this industry has focused on the design aspects when it gets to the tech and the documentation, but now I see we got close to 15% are out of the construction trade assemblies and facility owners and operators. That's fantastic. So good mix. So just right at 2/3 are the architects and designers, uh, process documenters, if you will. So what is, a file type or a file format? These terms are kind of used interchangeably. Don't want to get too technical today, but whenever we have a file name, how we store information, it doesn't matter if it's a complete project facility or a part, a hinge. Every computer file, as you well know, it has an extension or characters are after the file name. They tell us. So what tells the system what program to use. So there's literally thousands of file type extensions. Many of them are proprietary. Proprietary meaning that they only will work with certain software platforms, and others are somewhat interchangeable. We'll get into more of that in just a minute. But so the file type or file format, that's the question. Why do we need multiple file types of the same building product content? Why does it matter? Well, one of the reasons is that we're seeing a lot of information exchanges. I'm just going to use that as a broad term. It's used specifically in some cases, but and these are all getting different names. A common data environment, CDE. We've seen a common data interface. You name it, it's happening that way. A single source of truth. These are all repositories of really every piece of information that is relativity to any specific facility and the operation of that facility. IFC is it's really one of our only ISO standard classifications for a data format. It's as we'll talk about a little later on, it's an interchangeable format, able to be read by a lot of different types. So how do these file types communicate? I've always looked at this. This is a little bit of a Steve perspective here, because a lot of these words get used interchangeably, though they're really not. So files can be integrated. They can be integration within a specific piece of software. They can be interoperable or interoperate, and they can also interface. All these are a continuum of how closely they're related and how they work together. So an integration, it's the ability of systems to exchange and make use of the information within a given piece of software. That means they're combined so that it become a whole. A good example is if you download building product content off the BIM Object platform, and you're working within a piece of software, ArchiCAD or Revit, you integrate that product into that file, that facility, that building, that whatever it is that you're working on within that software. That we had two separate files. They were integrated. It was brought to be part of the same exact file. Interoperate or interoperability. This is the ability of two different systems or softwares can exchange and make use of the information. They can read across and consume it, or output it for others to read as well. So it's the data that's exchanged between two or more systems, and it's understandable in its native format to each of those two systems. An example of this is the scheduling software. It might be able to read data out of the model. You get into how much time it takes to actually install a specific building product that could become part of that model data, but it's able to be extracted and utilized in a scheduling system. So interface, this is the most disconnected, though it's still connected. What is an interface? Well, usually it's two or more systems are exchanging information, but there's normally an intermediary. There's normally something that happens, and we're seeing this really somewhat, thankfully, starting to minimize, but because it often requires human intervention. Machines can talk to each other so well now, and as I talked last week a little bit about Industry 4.0, and really urge you all to dig into that just a little bit to understand some of the concepts there. It's really a game changer. So this is where in interfaces we're using complete file imports and exports. So a lot of software will export its native file format out into other consumable formats, but it has to be done as a manual. You can automate it to a degree. But another type of interface is an API, or an application programming interface. And this is where a system, again, has its own, if you will, translator. It's built in. It's a translator built in that is different than strictly being able to read and write and consume. So I want to have another quick poll here just to want to see, do you currently use or manage multiple file types? I've had some interesting conversations recently with folks, because so many folks for so long really thought that, and we have, this industry, we've all worked in our own silos so much, we don't really understand how the work we're doing now impacts others. Hang on a minute while I get a drink while you're answering the poll. Excellent. This is great. So two-thirds of you are utilizing numerous file types, and this is a big shift from even a few years ago. Glad to see those silos breaking down. That's great. Two-thirds, a full two-thirds, typically utilize numerous file types. So I'm not going to share that one with you right now because it's pretty straightforward. Let's get on with the show, so to speak. So what's changed over the last few years with these? Well, I can tell you it wasn't probably more than 5 years ago. I couldn't use any of the Apple's products or G Suite products and directly consume a document. Let's say create in Word, just something as simple and basic as a document or an Excel spreadsheet, unless we output it first back to the whole interface into a importer or exporter. And that's changed pretty quickly. And now we don't even consider it. I can click and open up if I'm working in Google Sheets or Google Docs, and I can interchangeably utilize Word or Excel within it. And that's I state that because it's something that we all use every day. May not be readily thinking about it, but this is what we need to do, and we'll be doing in the industry. So last week, as I was going through this, I saw that almost every one of the bullet points from last week's slides, so I'm just going to show these slides briefly, they use these file types. So in the planning, in each of these, artificial intelligence, it consumes these. And some of the file types that we're talking about can be what I call the, I'm not going to, I hate to use this word, as you guys, most of you that know me know, but generic, which is a CSV, which is a comma separated values, or even basic text files a lot of times. A lot of those are very interchangeable, but artificial intelligence consumes a lot of this, and we're seeing more and more of this. Like we saw some hacks yesterday that were pretty impressive that are using this in generative design. That's what that was based on, which is the next one. And it's not an AI file type. AI is actually a proprietary, back when I mentioned proprietary file type, but a lot of these artificial intelligence don't even have proprietary file types because they're consuming numerous and multiple file types or content data that may be graphical data. It could be it could be any kind of numeric data, obviously textual data. Generative design and space planning, same thing. Most of these consume, a lot of times will use one of the standard CSV file formats. Modeling, this is more proprietary file types. Some of them do output. Many of the Revit and ArchiCAD, SolidWorks, they all, back to that import export, they will actually translate another file type. But a lot of times, though, some of the, we call it the fidelity or the clarity or the functionality is lost across that. I mean, years ago we had it was called a DXF file type, which was for CAD drawings in the early days, and they would come across, but they wouldn't have any of the intelligence that might be involved in, or remain in a true the CAD package it was authored in. So virtualization, another big one. This is a file type that's being used and being consumed. This is a little less, let's say it doesn't play as well with others, because it's really about how are we showing, instead of renderings and drawings and looking at it on a screen, we're virtualizing oftentimes an immersive experience for someone. And these are using OBJ file types and FBX. And again, don't get hung up on the acronyms of the file types. It's just, these are all really important through this full building lifecycle. Cost definition, how are they extracting out of that building model the data to purchase every piece of product necessary to complete that facility or that renovation. So in the purchasing process. We'll move to assembly. Last week we talked about assembly. So site logistics, material sequencing and handling. This is again back to the time studies, scheduling. Primavera, a lot of the other scheduling software programs can consume. Often it's the basic translatable to file types. Again, the CSVs and these data stores. SQL data even is another huge one. Offsite manufacturing. This is one area that we need some more work in. Believe it or not, a lot of the machines are still using G codes, which were used and developed, I think, back in the 60s or the 70s, that are driving CNC machines. But they're looking for this out of this building model in many cases to do that. Robotics data, what they call tool paths. How is it following around? These all take different ones. Turnover. The file types used there, Kobe. That's IFC. That's a type of a subset of IFC. There's a lot of different information exchange formats in that. Facility management systems data. So there's numerous facility management, Archibus, and others that consume not just the model content, but a lot of the parameters that are tied to that content. Same with asset management, operations and maintenance. MSDS. Sometimes it might be the old stuff of a PDF. That's what we still have to use in some cases as we transition to a truly digital. PDF I don't consider that a digital file type. That's strictly it takes a human interaction to read it. It's not machine to machine readable in terms of the data. So that PDFs are one that they're still a little bit of an Achilles heel for us as an industry. But a lot of that content is becoming set up as property sets. For instance, on BIM object, you're able to externalize a lot of this data that's tied to specific building products for these types of functionalities. IoT sensors and utilization monitoring, and again, they're consuming a lot of the data about the original pieces of equipment. So total cost of ownership, another big one. I'm actually going to be having a complete webinar on this coming up. There's a new standard coming out that is really being looked at, and it really is an umbrella or a bridge on all this data and how do they consume all these different file types into a single system to really understand the total cost of ownership of even a building product or a building assembly, say an HVAC system or a ventilation system or a plumbing system, fire protection system, all the way up to a building, all the way up to a complete campus of buildings. It's being looked at. We're back in the renovation and remodel. Same thing again, digital twin. These same file types are used in every one of these phases of the process. So it's really critical that today, and we're able to work with the same information in multiple file types in each one of these sessions because they're being used. There's an actual situation that came up I want to share with you also, especially those of you that are building product manufacturers. A few weeks ago, one of our customer success managers came to me and asked me, and they said, Steve, they go, I don't really understand. I have 2 vendors on our platform here, and so I've taken the names of these companies off to protect the innocent, but they said we have two companies that have almost the same number of product pages, same products on the platform, and virtually the same products. And but one has almost four times the number of downloads and views, and in other words, their content's being consumed much more and utilized much more so than another. Why is that? So we looked. I mean, even this particular company A, we'll call them single file format company, they had some decent activity over this graph that I'm showing you was from January 1st of 2019 up to June 1st of 2019. So we had a 5-month period. In the exact same 5-month period, almost the exact company, you can see the top company had only 10 products, the bottom one had 11 products. But the difference is staggering when it comes to the number of times one was used over the other. So we dug into it a little deeper, and one thing our system will do is it allows us to see the file types that have been downloaded. And the single format folks, they only had a single modeling file type and some PDFs. That's it. They were only publishing content for one software platform, one modeling platform. The bottom one, that particular company had utilized our BIM script process, and in BIM script it outputs 9 file types that give them some of the major software platforms capabilities of Vectorworks, 3ds Max, SketchUp, ArchiCAD, Revit, as well as IFC, and even the FBX and OBJs. Again, these are all separate file types of the exact same products, even STL, 3D printable format. But we looked and saw that largely the big difference was these all were additional file types that were being downloaded that weren't even available for the single file format guy. So needless to say, I believe he's in the middle of now having his content further developed in the BIM script platform. So there's been some recent projects that I run across. I was a couple of weeks ago down at University of Southern California at their School of Architecture. They held a day-long symposium called BIMBOP. They've had this, believe it or not, for 13 years, which means they were pretty early into the adoption. But there were some amazing presentations on large, very, very large products that were utilizing cross-team data. When I say cross-team data, I'm talking about curtain wall installers sitting down and leveraging the same exact data that came out of the structural engineer, and they're working together on these. One of them was, an example is the Lucas Museum of Narrative Arts. This is ironically in the picture I have, that's the Coliseum behind it where the Los Angeles Rams play, but that was built for the Olympics many, many years ago and is going through renovation. But this is a very futuristic building. The graphic I have doesn't really do it justice, but that's that complete facade and that complete facility. In this one, the presenter that shared with us some of the utilization of tech in this building's design shared that the board of directors, when they went to have this approved in their meeting, they actually had six setups for the Vive, which is virtual reality, that the board actually were immersed in the building. So they were able to walk through the building, teleport themselves around the building and experience the building instead of seeing it. In other cases, a lot of these situations, they would take boards in and drawings and renderings and put them up on the walls and so forth. But in this case, they actually used this technology, again, because the content was all developed with these multiple file formats. They were able to put it into an immersed virtual reality environment. Another one that was really interesting, HMTV did they're a very, very large contractor, and with others, the recent Las Vegas Raiders Stadium in the U.S. here. It's under construction. This curtain wall system that they utilized, there's a piece of that even is movable, that moves. And this whole particular building all of these cross-functional teams, it wasn't just designed and then handed off to the fabricators to create shop drawings. They all used and worked in the same modeling environment to, eventually, yes, the fabricators had to extract it out, but all the connections and everything, all the engineering was done in a similar environment, not in silos. They were all working on the same platform, and then they would bring it out in the respective for the actual digital fabrication and extract it from a common source, back to our single source of truth. The other one is it's ongoing now, and this was a bit unique. It's just had the roof structure put up, but there was some fascinating sharing of information again through that design development phase, where they're working with the actual fabricators on all these special products. So in each of these cases, we're seeing just massive amounts of the data that's able to be shared, because they have the file types that allow today's software to read and write. Hopefully we get less and less of the import export, and we get more direct input on reading and writing, because once we import and export, that can again lose a lot of the fidelity. And even worse, I didn't even have this on one of the interfaces, but there's a lot of cases where people are taking PDF printouts of a model in terms of plan views in paper-based thinking, and they're having to reinterpret that and build their own model from those. That's one of the real places where we lose integrity, and they're never kept synchronized, or there's no single source of truth. So what was the canary in the coal mine? This was really fascinating to me. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes on this one. So in all of these examples and other ones that I've been part of recently, almost every architectural, engineering, construction, or major trade involved in those examples had their own. If you would, I want you guys to go out and answer this in your chat box, and then I'll tell you what actually happened. But I would love to see what folks are currently thinking. An answer to this is, what was new and different in all these file types and all this data and all these examples of these really major facility constructions. What do you see as happening? They had their own file format system. That's a good one. That's one of our challenges is having so many file format systems. Now, the canary in the coal mine is they all had, every one of those projects had programmers and data scientists involved. I can't tell you how many of the large architectural, engineering, and construction, even trades, they had computer programmers essentially engaged and writing scripts, actually writing apps, if you will, to consume these various even file types and bring them across into the various proprietary systems. So it wasn't their own file format system. That would have been, that takes us even one step further away from what we're trying to do, and that is that to have fidelity in the information about any facility through that full building life cycle. So with that, that's a quick overview on, why does it matter? Why are there numerous file types? I hope to see, as we progress as an industry, that there'll be fewer, although I think, with certain tools, when you get to augmented reality, virtual reality, those will remain needing a separate file type of the same sort of thing. But, we're seeing, even back to my slide with the Microsoft Office and Zoho and G Suite, we're seeing where even though they may be stored as different native file types, they're able to consume each other. And a lot of that is really, really coming up in a more normalized way. We don't even think anymore about what kind of, do I have to import that or export that? Let me look through our questions here. So is it true for all product manufacturers that those with multiple file formats see far more downloads than those with only single file formats? I have not actually done this research. we have a data scientist now, and that would be, you know, a good one. But I will say that what we see globally is there's certain flavors, certain platforms that certain modeling softwares that are more prevalent in certain markets than others. Yeah, you know, the European markets certainly have favored one format for a while. North American a different. We get into Asian markets, it's even a different again. So to be able to say that you know, there's a single, you know, if you're only publishing in single file formats, and it kind of depends on the actual product type too, but in general, it's necessary to have them all. They really are, and hopefully that'll go away, as I said someday. But right now, it's certainly a big part of what we're doing as we transition this. Just like we're hoping that drawings and paper-based thinking goes away, we're not there yet. So, yeah. There's a good point made. Brian Rasmussen said analysis can't be justified by file formats alone, and that's very true. There's a lot of factors that go into that. Naming convention. Amy Beckenham, that's a great point. She asked a question about, you know, what are the naming conventions? These are all over the board, from you know, individuals having their own naming conventions to you know, firms, whether it be design or construction firm, having naming conventions. Yesterday, in the hackathon, one of the as I was a judge, I got to have a look under the hood with a number of the different teams, and one of them was on dynamo scripting. They actually wrote an app that would go out and search the servers of a given design firm to pull together, you know, all the dynamo scripts and be able to. They had used, you know, everyone kind of had their own naming convention. Well, what's in that? How do we know if this is a script we need to use or not? And so that's actually what this app did. That's how crazy this is these days on naming conventions. When it comes to naming of the extension, that's usually established by, you know, again, the proprietary file types are normally established and owned by the software platform, unless you get into some of the general domain file names like common CSV, comma separated values, or you know, text-based values, the old-fashioned TXT. More of these are, you know, what is a standard? Sometimes it's what everybody uses becomes a de facto standard. So those are all factors that go to that convention. Randy Garcia made a great point here. That fidelity is lost often when we're bringing in you know, the import-export translation, because some of the values are lost. Joel van der Merwe, the cloud collaboration, he pointed out that is huge now. With cloud collaboration, we no longer always have to ship files, you know, a project file of a complete facility to another partner in the building process. It's a shared environment. How open were architects in sharing their model with the contractor? So that's a great question, and we get this a lot because of a lot of the laws. And I've said for quite a while, I think we're going to see this. This has been one of the defining factors to holding back this industry, is the transfer of liability. We're seeing what's happening now. In most of those cases, the owners were driving the process. It was no longer the architect or the contractor or someone else. The owners were defining the process, and there are roles defined within that. They set up a model space in the cloud, as someone just pointed out a minute ago. So the architects were a part of that team. So essentially, everyone was embellishing that in those examples I gave, the common model. The metadata to be included with a 3D model. That's this is a bit of a hot topic often on, especially when so we at BIM Object work with what we call our content consumers, which are the users. We have well over 1.2 million registered professionals on our platform that actually consume and download the content, they often, especially if they're early design development folks, don't like all the property values built into the model. So at BIM Object, we have our property sets, which are, we externalize those. And this is one of the reasons we have all of our content has a call to home function, where essentially a GUID or an identifier that lets 5 years down the road those external property sets of maybe the STC ratings and or flame spread or any of this other metadata, Kobe data, can all be accessed independently of the, let's call it the model file. And as this evolves, as was the examples I gave you, they're not passing from one party to another the whole project file. So it's going to become less critical than it did before, but so many of the designers that talk to me say, no, we don't, we get rid of all that when we download the content. And I know that in the full building lifecycle, they really need that. So a lot of the metadata, we've come up with that as a solution to externalize it. So yeah, the rest of these are good questions. We have some repetitive ones. Yeah, security in the shared environments. I hear this a bit. There are numerous platforms that allow this roles to be defined, usually by one of the stakeholder representatives. So often this is where we see the role of what we call VDCs this day has really sprung up. They're more of an owner's representative or agent, and their focus is how to make sure that the best interests of the owners are being served. So often, there'll be different roles for different participants within a project that have different capabilities. Maybe some only have view, maybe some commenting, just like even in Google Suite, you can, when you share a document out, you can give different rights to different people. Great point, Brian Rasmussen. He said, how come I keep mentioning CSV, text, and so on, but not IFC? IFC is a excellent information exchange format, and it does, especially once it goes, I don't want to get too technical, but IFC 4 now was the first version that allows parametrics to be involved. Although we haven't really seen that, at least I haven't. If any of you have in the marketplace, a software that's effectively utilizing and leveraging IFC for the parametric values of it, I'd love to know more about that. But that's a great point. And Office, there's another one that I haven't mentioned that IFC comes in that same format as well as XML. Often that's more readily consumed by a lot of the other apps and programming, but it's another what I call the generics. So thanks for your questions there. Carl Johnson asked, what impact do we see ISO 19650 having on manufacturers' content? The jury's still out on that. What I really see more than any of these standards is that the purchasing decision has the person purchasing the product, whether it be a general contractor, a quantity surveyor, whoever that is, really has the ability to impact that as much as anything. ISO 19650, so they could still sell a product that maybe doesn't have all the metadata that's required to comply with 19650. But what's going to happen is that DDC or that GC or someone at some point is going to have to go out and build that in. That's what we've seen. That's why really we've seen probably more utilization of a lot of the technology of the building process happen with what I call the assembly phase, where these guys they have to make it fit. And last week to my webinar I talked about, and I have this little Lego graphic that we use often. The design intent doesn't work any longer when it gets to the assembly phase. It has to work. So I think that type of thing is going to have more of an effect. ISO 19650 is going to drive that demand, but I don't know that manufacturers are going to actually, until they are demanded that we're not using your product, we're not using your products in our facilities until it's compliant with all the standards, then that's what's really going to make it change. So anyway, thanks a lot for all you attending today. Sign up on BIMobject.com as a user, and you will be able to receive all of the invites for all of our webinars and presentations that we have globally. You can also follow us on LinkedIn at BIMobject. On LinkedIn, there's a link there for that. Upcoming on July 24th, we got our webinar Wednesday. Is we have this every Wednesday. Actually, typographical error on my part. This is not the topic. This was last week's topic. So I get a check mark on my detention for that there. Anyway, next week it's Nurbs versus Mesh. It's if you really want to geek out with content development, that's a pretty deep way of representing. So Peter Mate in Budapest and Lawrence Lamb, these are our global trainers for BIM script. They're going to share a lot with that, the differences, the whys, the nuances. So join us for that. August 7th, again, I have not set the topic yet because we got so many suggestions for topics out of our last, which again, with the survey at the end, it's a short survey, and really that's what we're looking for. What else do you want? What do you need? That's why we did the one on file types, and I followed up a little bit more because they were not understanding how the information got used through that full building life cycle. So let us know, and we'll get that set, and the invites will get out in the next week or so. So anyway, as we close out, that survey will pop up. There we go. That was a good move there on the survey will pop up once I close out the webinar. And as well, recording will be available. You should receive an email in a couple of days and be able to share that out with anyone that you would like. And also, I'm putting them out on our BIMobject YouTube channel. If you lose your original invite, the original invite will always work if you go out again, as well as the follow-up link for the recording. But our YouTube channel, the BIMobject YouTube channel, I'm working. I haven't got them all out there from when we started doing these, but most of them are out there, and we're working to get those out within a couple days as well, and get those uploaded to YouTube channel, so you're able to follow us on that. So anyway, thanks for enjoying my space here at the hotel in downtown Seattle. We'll be here all week. I hope to maybe see some of you at the Built and Building Content Summit that's going on here, that they have those all over the world. And we'll see you again in a couple of weeks for another webinar Wednesday with BIM Object.